So let's talk about dismissive avoidant attachment styles and on and off relationships. This may be something that you've experienced or been on the receiving end of, or perhaps you are a dismissive avoidant who's been through a lot of on and off relationships. And in this video, we are going to cover why this happens, what some of the root causes are for this phenomenon, and also we'll talk about sort of the situationship version of this, and then what you can actually do if you want to break this cycle, whether it's being a dismissive avoidant yourself or if it's being somebody who is on the receiving end of this with a dismissive avoidant, how we can sort of get out of that gray area. So, first and foremost, I think it's really important to acknowledge that the on and off relationship for a dismissive avoidant really reflects the two components that the dismissive avoidant has in regards to their needs. Dismissive avoidants are, just like anybody else, wired for attachment on one hand. And on the other hand, dismissive avoidants also have been conditioned because of painful experiences to fear attachment. So you can think of it this way: we want something, but we fear it. And that's going to make for a conflicting dynamic within that individual. And the most important or interesting part of this, and probably one of the most valuable things if you're on the receiving end of this to deeply understand, is that most of our fears don't really come fully online until we form a deep attachment. So this is why you see dismissive avoidance in the dating stage in the first few months of dating tend to do really well with it, right? They don't have a lot of these fears coming up. They don't have as many of these push-pull patterns. Oftentimes we'll see that a dismissive avoidant can be very invested in the first couple months of dating. It's really when the dismissive avoidant starts deeply attaching that those subconsciously stored fears from childhood get reprojected back out onto somebody's current experience. So because dismissive avoidants go through childhood emotional neglect and oftentimes a form of enmeshment as well, although it can just be one or the other. Childhood emotional neglect causes somebody to have a shrunken emotional bandwidth and to have a lot of fears around what it means to bond. In other words, if you are trying to really deeply connect with a dismissive avoidant, but that person has learned or been conditioned by their past experiences to think, well, bonding and connection will actually hurt me, it will result in neglect, it will result in my needs not being met. And the only way I stay safe from that is to stay independent. Well, then we're really up against a dismissive avoidance entire set of programs that they've adopted or been conditioned from childhood that they've been carrying with them. And so it makes for a complex situation. And so as a result, one of the common things that we'll see a lot with dismissive avoidance is that they do really well in the early stages of relationships. Then once that attachment bond really forms at a deeper level, all of those fears come up and it causes them to want to sabotage. It causes them to flaw find in their partner because flaw finding is a subconscious strategy to create distance, right? If I can tell myself all your flaws and tell you that I don't need you, well, now there's more distance between us in my mind that I'm creating, right? And so dismissal avoidants go through this cycle when they become afraid, and they don't realize the vast majority of the time that underneath that is actually fearing a repeat pattern from childhood taking place, fearing deeply connecting and needing to rely on somebody and really being vulnerable and then it not being well received, or really tuned into, right? Not being nourished essentially. And so they try to protect their individuality. They try to protect their space and their distance as a means to protect themselves from the recurring experience of that. Now, what we'll often see as a result of this is dismissive avoidance. They tend to have these sort of two stages in relationships where they can push somebody away. The first stage is sometimes around the 6 month mark. We'll see a dismissive avoidant kind of panic, get cold feet, push somebody away. The next stage, if they make it past that 6 month mark, tends to be around a year and a half or 2 years. And we'll see these sort of sabotaging patterns come online where when somebody gets out of that honeymoon stage, with if you know a little bit about the stages of relationships, and without going too far off topic here, we have different stages of relationships, and different stages affect different attachment styles in different ways. We have our dating stage, which is kind of the vetting, getting to know each other phase. Then if we've made a commitment to focus on somebody, we have our honeymoon stage. Then we have our power struggle stage, stability stage, commitment and bliss stages. And this is based off of the work of Dr. Susan Johnson, but I just kind of tweaked some of the stages. I pulled out dating and honeymoon stage because I find them to be very, unique patterns in terms of the meaning behind them, right? Like we have to really date and get to know somebody, and then we enter into the honeymoon stage. And so when you look at this, you'll see that there's these different dynamics here that are so important to recognize. And it's that dismissive avoidants, when they build that deep bond, they sometimes push away. And also there's sort of added insult to injury once somebody's entering into the power struggle stage. It tends to magnify the fears and the so-called flaws that somebody's perceiving. So this will often make for a dismissive avoidant needing to push somebody away, right? Kind of sabotage a relationship, break up, leave, ghost, pull away dramatically, go missing for days at a time because they're dealing with their own internal processes here. Now, as a result of that, that may cause a relationship to fall apart, or the dismissive avoidant may dismiss the relationship and actually, initiate the relationship being apart, like breaking up the relationship. But then what happens a lot of the time for DAs is that then those fears kind of, go back into the subconscious mind. They get repressed back because that attachment has now been separated. And within finding that space between themselves and another person, the dismissive avoidance starts to kind of like go back into feeling their feelings more so. And so they may reach out again indirectly. And if the partner that they're dating or doing these sort of on and off dances with is receptive and reinitiates contact, we'll usually see that bond, get back together. And it's not all the time, but it's quite frequent that it happens, especially when the DA kind of pushes away all of a sudden and from this place of fear. And so they're always in this sort of balance between their feelings and their fears. But then what a dismissive avoidant is very unlikely to do because of those fears is really reinitiate getting back into the relationship immediately early on. So generally it's really the partner, like the DA may reach back out indirectly, but it's really if the partner's receptive and sort of pushes the relationship dynamic along, that's when we'll tend to see that relationship reignite. Because DAs don't like to be vulnerable. They don't like to really reinitiate things, especially if there's been a little bit of turmoil in the relationship history between themselves and somebody else. And so it really matters, like, is that partner receptive? Now, unfortunately, if this dynamic continues with these on and off relationships all over and over again, it eventually erodes the foundation, right? Eventually, we keep thinking the person's going to leave, or the person isn't sure how they feel. Like, we can't do the on and off dance indefinitely. It just erodes things, it breaks things down, it makes them fall apart. And the problem with this is that if we are in a position where we keep trying to hang on, we keep trying to see it through, not only will it erode our relationship to ourselves, but it's going to erode the relationship to the other person in sometimes irreparable ways, right? Like we'll sometimes see that there's just so much resentment and frustration and confusion and uncertainty that, sometimes people start acting out of character even more, becoming harsher to each other, or hurting each other more and more. And so there's a couple things we can really do here to create change. The first thing is, if you are a dismissive avoidant, you have to figure out what those subconscious fears are. And a lot of them are the fear of being criticized or seen as defective, the fear of losing yourself in relationships, the fear of losing your freedom, your independence, the fear of being vulnerable and being hurt by somebody, the fear of appearing weak if you show too many of your emotions, a deep fear that you're not capable of doing relationships in a healthy way. All of these are ideas that you actually essentially accumulated through conditioning from past experiences. Just because that was your past, it does not mean it is your future or your present. And so we have to actually reprogram these ideas by challenging them and then leveraging repetition and emotion to feed our subconscious mind new ideas, new possibilities repetitively until it sort of outweighs. Like if we fire and wire new ideas using repetition and emotion, because it's part of how we form neural pathways, then you'll see over time, you see things differently. So you have to ask yourself, why am I capable of healthy relationships? Why is this possible for me? And find yourself ample evidence repetitively, usually across about a 21-day period, because that's roughly how long it takes to start really deepening subconscious programs. So we can really do a lot of that work. And that's really powerful to do around your core fears of relationships. And you can also improve setting boundaries and communicating better so that you don't have to lose yourself in relationships. You can tell somebody, hey, I love you, I care about you, and I need Sunday afternoon to myself to go do my own thing. And, when we're communicating clearly and we can get our needs met, then, people are much more accommodating when we can communicate clearly, right? They take it less personally. And if you're on the flip side of this, if you're the loved one of a dismissive avoidant going through this on and off cycle, I want you to sit down and write out like what your standards are in relationships. What are you actually looking for? What would make you happy? What characteristics do you want to see in a relationship? What do you want your relationship life to look like? And then I want you to ask yourself, okay, where are we not getting those needs met from the dismissive avoidant partner? And how can I start communicating about these needs? And then what you have to do is set a deadline and pour yourself into the relationship. So that deadline could be 3 months, it could be 2 months, it could be 6 weeks, it could be 5 months. Like you have to decide how long you're willing to go with your needs not being met. But you have to set a deadline, pour everything you can into that period of time, communicate your needs, communicate your boundaries, share the things that are important to you. And either the needle will move and you'll see growth because your partner will be willing to work on this with you. And if a dismissive avoidant is really ready, they will work on this with you. Or by the end of that, let's say 2 months, it'll be loud and clear that the person's not willing to work on it with you because of maybe, different priorities, or, maybe they don't want to work through their fears and they'd rather sort of keep them at bay or ignore or avoid them. And the vast majority of the time, I actually see people really be willing to do the work if their partner's communicating really clearly, really kindly that, hey, these are some things that I need to change. Can we work on these things together? And if somebody's not, then you're going to find out at that end of the deadline loud and clear that it's just not a fit at this time. And we can have some finality there. We can decide, okay, it's not working. I'm going to work on my healing journey. I'm going to go a separate way because I see that if I've poured everything in for these 2 months and I haven't seen the needle move, then it's really not meant to be, because I'm not going to be in a relationship where my needs are being met or my standards are being fulfilled. And it's an important, radical, honest conversation to have with yourself. And at least you know very clearly at that point, you can walk away guilt and regret free. And so, of course, dismissive avoidants, they have some of these patterns because of pain. But also, if you're the loved one of a dismissive avoidant, you have to make sure that you don't weaponize your empathy against yourself for their pain to the point where you just disregard your own standards, your own needs. And so it's really important to take both sides into consideration, no matter who you are or where you're coming from. And if you want to do a deeper dive into healing and really trying to repair relationships and like how to actually express your needs better and your boundaries and your standards, I've got a course called How to Repair Your Relationships. It really goes into a lot of the stuff in a lot more detail. You're welcome to check it out for free for 7 days using the link down below. And if you use that link, if you ever decide you want to cancel, if you cancel before day 7, then you literally never get charged anything. You can access all of the courses at PDS for free for that 7-day period. So I will put that down below for you if you want to do a deep dive. You can definitely get through at least one course in that 7-day period itself. And that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're enjoying this channel, please consider subscribing. Let me know your patterns with dismissive avoidance, or if you are a dismissive avoidant in terms of on and off relationships. I'd love to hear. I can definitely create more content about that as I learn more about everybody who's here following or has questions. And that's it for today. If you don't want to miss any other videos, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see you in tomorrow's video as well. Thank you for watching.